Resuming debate?
Resuming debate.
Resuming debate.
My name is Garnet Jennis, husband, father, reader, and blessed with the honor of serving in Canada's national parliament. I want to thank you for listening. I think one of the biggest problems plaguing our society is that we don't actually debate much anymore. We inhabit our own little silos, conservatives talking to other conservatives, liberals talking to other liberals, oil workers talking to other oil workers, tax lawyers talking to other tax lawyers. You get the idea. People talking to those with whom they already share significant common experience and values. And that means that when we get together across experiential or values divides, we often end up shouting at each other or just talking past each other. So if you're listening to this podcast because you agree with me, that's great. But if you've tuned in and you come from a different political party, a different intellectual tradition, or a different part of the country, I want you to feel particularly welcome because this podcast is for you. It's about creating opportunities for good, fruitful conversation and debate among people who don't always agree. In order to do that, we're going to start every show with an interview with a guest, but then conclude with a debate involving one or two other parliamentarians from different parties. We're going to try to get into some really meaty and important topics, and not just about politics. So in light of the federal budget being tabled on April 19th in the House of Commons, this will be the first budget in 2 years. We're going to be focusing our discussion today on Canada's fiscal situation and the upcoming budget. With that in mind, for the first part of our discussion, I'm very pleased to be joined by Scott Hennig. Scott is a longtime friend, a constituent, and he runs the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Scott, it is great to have you on for the first edition of the Resuming Debate podcast.
It's my pleasure, and I like to joke, Garnet, that I knew Garnet when he was young.
Yeah.
That
got a lot of laughs at the Rotary Club. Yeah,
I'm going to use that joke forever.
Yeah,
because you still look young. So
yeah, it'll be less funny when I'm like, in my 60s and
it's gonna start. You already have 3 kids or 4 kids, so
yeah, I lose track as well. So So Scott, we were chatting beforehand. We've got a couple of the MPs for the second half that are on listening to this conversation, and you told us you thought we were crazy for going into electoral politics. You're in an important advocacy role. You don't have constituents, but you have members of the CTF. Tell us just a bit quickly about yourself, about the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, and why you think the work you do there is so important for the country.
Well, to start with, why I think you guys are all bonkers for running for office is that it is a difficult job, and you're never going to make everyone happy. And it's the highest of highs and lowest of lows. You win your election, everyone loves you, you feel great. You lose your election, you feel like everyone hates you. I mean, I've worked around politics, and I've worked with enough politicians to know that the highs are never really as high as they are, and their lows are never actually as low. And it's like an impossible job, and you have to go and live in Ottawa, of all places, for half the year. I mean,
every time we get a small pay increase, people like you are giving us grief, right?
Absolutely. And then you get hammered by people like me. So I don't know why you guys do it. It seems like you're masochists, you're suckers for punishment. But no, why? Well, look, where I do think politics is important and public policy is important. And, the reason why I chose to go the route of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation rather than something like a run for office is that these are the issues that I find most important and that I'm most interested in. And I'm not put on, no leader is going to put me on a committee where I have to study something that I have no interest in, which is another reason why I think you guys are bonkers. But I've been here for 15 years. I started here as the Alberta director doing communications in this province. Then I moved up to be the vice president running our communications division. And then a couple of years ago, I took over as the CEO. And I think that one thing about politics is that politicians like to dominate it, and they don't like outside actors. And I think that the outside actors are often somewhat the most important part of our political system, because we can't leave it just to 338 MPs or how many ever MLAs or city councillors to make all the decisions, and not just because they're not capable or bright enough, but because as Ralph Klein used to talk about, dome disease is a real thing. When people spend too much time talking with really other smart people who are also in public life, they don't have an appreciation for what's happening in the rest of the province and country. And I think that also extends to the political staff as well. I mean, I've talked to many political staff who, view after they've left that world as having sort of a fog lift, so they can see things outside of the bubble. Like the regular people don't read the Hill Times, and that's often forgotten outside of Ottawa and outside of a lot of capitals. So I think that advocacy is important. I think that, and not just the advocacy that we do, but I think advocacy of a lot of on a lot of different issues, both on across the spectrum, is important because it gives a broader context to these issues, and it allows people to have more of an outlet to express their views on issues. So
Yeah.
I think, I think that the money that you guys spend in Ottawa is valuable and important, and that every single dollar should be treated with respect, and that taxpayers have every right to scrutinize and hold to account how politicians and how governments spend their money. So I think it's an important organization, and love the work that we do.
Yeah. So just for the non-Albertans who are listening, dome disease is a reference to the dome that's the Alberta legislature, right? The equivalent term we have in Ottawa is people getting Ottawa-washed, right? It's the idea that when you're in the center of power, you absorb the mentalities of that place, and you are at risk of forgetting what the real priorities of most people are outside of, in the case of Alberta, the dome, and in the case of federal politics outside of Ottawa. And you're fairly unique in the advocacy world, I guess, as being the voice that's always saying spend less money, right? I mean, like it's fair to say most of the people that are in advocacy, they are zeroed in on a particular area of policy, and they want to see more emphasis, more resources there. But you're the, maybe not the only voice, but one of the only voices saying, no, we're not here for a grant. We don't want you to subsidize taxpayer advocacy or something like that. We just want you to spend less. Give us a sense of, and I want to get into the meat of the topic, the budget, the current situation. But give us one great memory from your time at the CTF, like something that you did that was fun, that was interesting, that was funny, or where you felt, I'm glad I went to work today, because if it wasn't for us, this wouldn't have happened.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of victories and things like that I like to draw on, and I can talk about those. But the one that I actually think about when you ask those questions is, I was in Saskatchewan. I was at the Saskatchewan legislature, and we were taking a giant balloon that may or may not look like a certain PEI senator on tour. And we originally inflated on the shores of right outside of Parliament on the river. But our next stop was at the Regina legislature, because we were taking it across the country. And it was a windy day. And this thing is like 3 stories tall. And you need 5 people to hold onto ropes to keep this thing upright. And I was holding onto these ropes, and it was shaking in the wind. It was going back and forth. And we're like, oh my God, we're going to this giant balloon's going to take off in the wind, and we're going to all get arrested for causing public endangerment. And I remember hanging onto this thing, and it was shaking. And I looked over, and I was just like, this is just the weirdest job. And I'm just so lucky that I have it. But who gets paid? Who gets paid every day to, do things like stand at the legislature holding a giant, may or may not look like Mike Duffy balloon? So it was, that was a weird one. Another weird one was, I showed up in Ottawa. We do our annual waste awards, the Teddies. And during that presentation, we have, we try to make it look like the Oscars. You have a guy in a tuxedo, you have a spokesmodel, although we don't do that anymore. And we have a guy in a pig suit. And the guy that we had for the pig suit that day was sick. And so we're looking around like, who's going to wear the pig suit? I'm like, well, I'm happy to wear the pig suit. So I threw a pig suit on, and I'm standing in the Charles Lynch Press Theater on stage, fumbling around with these cards, I'm like, this is, being aired on TV. And so I texted my wife, and I said, if you turn on CBC News Channel right now, you'll see me in a pig suit. And I just thought, that's a weird thing to say to your wife. That's an odd thing to have to say. So that's kind of stuff. I mean, there's the victories. Incredibly proud of the work we've done, on things like eliminating healthcare premiums in Alberta, which was a regressive tax that was one of the things that we had a lot of help from the NDP on getting that one through, because it was just a a tax that really hit the poorest of the poorest of the Albertans. So very proud of that one, and I was very happy about that stuff. So there's lots, but I always think back of the weird, bizarre days that you never get.
Well, a lot of successful advocacy organizations do kind of embrace the show, the stunting part of it, right? I mean, you're looking for ways to grab people's interest and attention, even if you have a serious, important message underneath that. We're living in a world of ever shrinking sound bites, and you're trying to grab hold of that, obviously. So those are good stories. All right, let's get into the meat of this. Scott, what are your hopes for the upcoming federal budget? Your maybe abstract ideal hopes, and then also maybe your realistic hopes.
Well, okay. I mean, you're asking me to be realistic? God, Garnet, come on. I mean, what we really want to see is no tax hikes, and I think that is realistic. I think that the government has acknowledged at times that hiking taxes during this fragile economy would be a mistake. That hasn't stopped them from hiking taxes on carbon and on alcohol, but it has, certainly kept us from seeing anything significant in terms of income or business tax hikes. So I'm hoping that we won't see any tax hikes. Also hoping that this won't be used as a giant excuse to blow a bunch of money. I mean, look, there's spending that needs to be done to get us through a pandemic, things that are related to healthcare and things that are related to keeping the economy from collapsing. And then there's fulfilling everyone's dream pet wish, because we've got unlimited borrowing right now. At least at least it seems to be the view. And we can, build back better by turning a crisis into an opportunity to remake the economy in a different way. And I worry that, one, I don't trust politicians, any of them, to know how to build an economy. For one. Two, I'm concerned that that's exactly what's going to happen, is that everyone's pet projects are going to be on the table, because the idea that, we can't borrow, we can only borrow 200 billion, we can't borrow 230 billion, isn't going to be really a strong sales pitch to the rest of the MPs in Ottawa, especially when you're in a minority situation and you're going to need other parties to pass a budget. And the easiest way to get another party on side is to find out what they want on their wish list, and it's almost always spending. So that's my concern, and I would love to see if there was a modicum of spending restraint and keep it to the things that we absolutely need to get through this pandemic.
So let's drill into that a little bit. Like, it's interesting. You talk about the challenge of making that marginal argument, right? Because once people are hearing deficit figures that are in the hundreds of billions of dollars, it's hard to make the case that as you said, the 230 versus the 200 billion, but that's a lot of money we're talking about, and that's money that comes off our national debt, and that we have to account for in the long term. What would fiscal restraint look like in the current climate, though? Like, I don't want to put you too much on the spot, but is there a number at which you would say that's fiscal restraint in terms of a deficit? And was there a number that you would say that's clearly beyond the pale? You probably never thought we would be here where we're talking about such large deficits, and I'm asking you to quantify what would be fiscal restraint. But within that, what's a reasonable and what's an unreasonable deficit in the context of the times?
Yeah. Well, Garnet, I'm old enough to remember when $1 trillion was a lot of money.
Yeah,
I mean, it's bizarre. Like, I honestly never thought in my wildest dreams that I would live long enough to see us hit $1 trillion. I mean, I felt like,
and that's the total debt figure we're talking about.
Yeah, that's
not the
deficit,
total debt figure. Yeah,
like 4 or 5 different debt and deficit figures, but the one that is most commonly used, which is the one that we use, is the trillion, just over. It's like 1.1 trillion right now, and we crossed the trillion mark I think it was in February. It's such a weird scenario here in that what this year's deficit is the one we just finished, I guess, is probably going to be 360 billion, which is 10 times, well, not quite 10 times, but 9 times bigger than the biggest deficits we've ever seen. We're borrowing more. We borrowed more in the last year than we borrowed during all of World War II, and in real terms, like in real terms. And fortunately, right after World War II, the government's really cracked down and got us back to at least got us back to close to balance before getting back into deficit spending. So what's a number? I mean, you're right. It's almost an impossible number to put a figure on this year that's acceptable versus unacceptable. I think we're going to be looking at what's it being spent on. So if there's promises in there to build, crazy projects that we wouldn't have normally built under normal circumstances, like high-speed rail between Calgary and Edmonton, or high-speed rail between, Hamilton and Montreal, that wouldn't have made economic sense 2 years ago or 5 years ago, and we start seeing those kinds of things in the budget, I think is going to be a real clue as to, we've lost the plot in terms of trying to keep things under control. I mean, like there's economists and others, I'm sure, at the Bank of Canada that can give you some figures as to, what our debt cap is, what our debt limit is. We've been hopeful, and I think we were happy to see that the government did put some caps on, although I think they may have taken them off, some limits as to how much we're going to borrow. But yeah, I mean, this is, I remember thinking back during the end of the Harper years when we were getting down to like budget deficits in the single figures, like, 9 billion, and thinking like, geez, they're so close. They could just, don't push it this next year. You can get to zero. And now, yeah, I mean, the difference of 20 or 30 or $50 billion is really,
Yeah.
really a margin of error in the size of these deficits. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy.
To me, the thing that you said that really sticks out the most is when you say we spent more last year than we did in all of World War II in real terms.
Because I should say borrowed. We borrowed.
Okay,
borrowed
right.
more.
Yeah. Okay. That's I mean, of course, we're going through a national crisis. We've been through national crises before, so the comparison is, I think, important. You're putting your finger on, I think, an important question about kind of the objective of the budget right now. There are a lot of people using this language of build back better, and you're making the case that essentially we should be getting back to normal as opposed to talking about building back better. That if there's something that doesn't make sense in normal times, then we shouldn't use the excuse of the extraordinary times to do it. Am I capturing your sentiment correctly? And can you maybe explain why getting back to normal is more important than building back better? I mean, I guess the counter argument would be there is this opportunity in some sense to reconsider the way we do a lot of different things. So should we use that opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, are there anything? Of course, there are things that you can change at any point. I mean, and I think that a lot of a lot of private businesses have taken this opportunity to look at things like automation and look at things like work from home, which weren't even up for a conversation. And I'm sure there are going to be companies right now that are looking to buy other companies who are about to collapse because they see a great purchase opportunity. Government is not quite the same. I mean, I think there's the same in terms of let's have a conversation about some of the things that we thought were impossible before, like work from home. Although, I think that, and real estate in Ottawa is not cheap, and it's we know that a lot of bureaucrats eat up a lot of space in downtown Ottawa, and if there's opportunities to hire good people who just don't happen not to be in downtown Ottawa but happen to be anywhere in the country, then I think we should look at things like that. But that's not usually the pet projects. Like those aren't the sort of things I'm thinking about when we talk about, well, at least when we hear about Build Back Better, and a lot of it is, should we use this opportunity because we're borrowing so much to do all kinds of things we wouldn't normally do, we wouldn't be able to get away with. And that's what I'm more concerned about. I'm not concerned about if we figure out a way to automate certain processes because staff couldn't be in the office. So that's the bigger concern, because that's the stuff that adds up and doesn't go away after we're done, or doesn't leave us in a necessarily a better fiscal position. It may, infrastructure, and this is, I think, a mistake that the Harper government made, and one that the Kenney government's making now, is that they were looking for ready-made projects to spur the economy with, or as it was called, shovel-ready projects to help the economy during the last crisis. And we ended up seeing a bunch of money wasted on canoe museums and bocce ball courts that wouldn't have otherwise got built. And that's the sort of stuff that comes with a long-term price tag. You've still got someone's got to work the door at the canoe museum 5 years later. And if you wouldn't have built it because it didn't make sense before, you shouldn't have built it during a crisis. And that's what we want to see avoided, because that stuff comes with a price tag that you can't walk away from 5 years later.
Okay. Let me come back and ask you to explain a bit more about the mechanics of debt and deficit. So why should people care about the deficit? For the time being, the government is spending more money than they're collecting in taxes. That would sort of facially seem to be in the interests of at least the current generation that's collecting the benefit of programs without paying for it. Conceptually, you have to pay all of this back. But a lot of governments around the world seem to just perpetually be running deficits. Does the music have to stop at some point? What does that look like? Why should people care about the deficit? Or is there a scenario in which you can just keep going on and on and on and on? I mean, if everybody else is doing it. So maybe just explain that for people, kind of why deficits matter and what's the long term here.
I really, really hope that modern monetary theory, that deficits don't matter, you can just print money endlessly, I hope it's true. I hope it's absolutely true, because we can eliminate all taxes. Like, why would anyone pay taxes anymore if we just have to turn on the printing presses? So I hope it's true. It'd be fantastic. We can all just have everything we want for free by printing money. So yeah, like, I would love that. That would be really good news for all of us. Unfortunately, I don't think it is true. And right now, what I think you're seeing in terms of why we aren't seeing huge inflation, or why we aren't seeing devaluation of the dollar yet with all the borrowing we're doing, is that, yeah, everyone else is doing it because we're in a global pandemic. When you have, but as soon as you have one major government stop the printing presses and stop all the borrowing, it's gonna, we're gonna find out the emperor has no clothes on, and the rest of us, if we just keep borrowing, our money is going to get devalued, because people who are lending us money in foreign currency aren't going to accept our currency back if we just keep printing it like we are. And that's when we may see inflation. Now, I don't think we're going to see. Some people have predicted when you have big borrowing is, huge inflation coming with it. And I keep on my desk this $50 million Zimbabwe note to remind myself of what can happen when one country decides to print money to no end. And it only takes a couple of big countries, though. If Europe figures out their stuff and turns off the printing presses, or if the US does, or if China does, and the rest of us keep going, that's when we're in real trouble, because we will start seeing inflation at that point, and we'll start seeing interest rates have to go up, because the Bank of Canada, they only care about one number, and that's generally the inflation rate. And they will not let our inflation rate jump to 4, 5, 6%. They will ratchet up interest rates. And as soon as interest rates kick back up, we'll start paying a higher price on our deficit. And when you start, we've been fortunate in most of the countries that we, got spending under control in the 90s and paid down hundred and some $billion worth of debt under the Chrétien government, and even a bit under the Paul Martin government, that we're in a better position, where we went from having like one out of every like $3 back in the early 90s was going to pay interest on the debt, down to a point where it's like one in every $12 is going to pay the interest on the debt. And that's when you start eating up money that's supposed to be there for why you pay your taxes. Mm-hmm. If 10, 12 years from now, one out of every $3 or $4 is going to pay interest on the debt, well, we're just that's just wasting the money. We're giving the money to a bunch of bankers and bondholders instead of spending it on the programs that Canadians want, and taxes go up. Like I said before, today's borrowing is tomorrow's taxes, and that's the big concern.
Yeah. I've certainly used the line with folks when I'm talking about this issue that we have to recognize that one way or another, the spending we're deciding to make today has to be paid back in higher taxes, lower social programs, or both in the future. And as you alluded to, not everybody agrees with that. There's some new ideas in the whole world of monetary policy, but I guess your point would be that if we don't get it back by paying it back, then we're inflating it back effectively, which reduces it's not a direct tax, but it's a form of taxation, right? It's a taxation on savings. The money you hold becomes less valuable as a result of inflation. I'm going to just try to get in two more questions here, Scott, and then we'll go to some of my parliamentary colleagues, and we'll have a debrief conversation on what you've had to say here. You've probably heard politicians talk about multiplier effects of savings, where they say that this particular project, it's an industrial subsidy, an infrastructure spend, childcare, whatever the case is. They say actually this is going to stimulate our economy and save money in the long run. Do you think that's true in certain cases? Do you think it's sort of just an excuse that's used? How do you respond to these arguments about if we spend more today, it's going to save us money in the long term?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I'm thinking specifically about things like investing in technology and automation that makes you more more capable or saves you money in the future. It may have a big upfront cost, but you can find the savings on the back end. So there's things like that. The multiplier effect, and I've talked to a bunch of economists on this because I've done some work on sports stadium subsidies, and that's like the number one argument with sports stadium subsidies is that, oh, there's a huge multiplier effect. Like if you don't subsidize this stadium, it's you're missing out on all this. And the guys that actually do these economists actually do some of these studies, and I've talked to like Professor Brad Humphreys, who's one of the he's testified before Congress on these things, who's dug into the actual economic analysis of some of these things. And he says like the multiplier effect on these things is made up, that the economists that usually work on these reports just pick a number and add it in as to what they think might happen, but there's no economic basis for it. Are there times where you can make a policy decision where there are benefits that you may not expect? Sure. I mean, I think we saw that with some tax reductions. That now this doesn't always happen, but if you're on the wrong side of the Laffer curve, you can see when you reduce taxes that you actually gain more money. We saw that in places like Alberta when they reduced income taxes in the early 2000s. They saw a big spike in income tax revenue. That doesn't always happen. I would be remiss if someone thought I was saying that tax cuts pay for themselves. I've heard some people say that's not necessarily true, but there are circumstances where that does happen. There's certainly circumstances where it doesn't happen, and I've never suggested to anyone that you should cut taxes because the government's going to get more money. I'm happy for the government to have less money when they cut taxes. So but there are some, but I know that they're not all true, and certainly when it comes to things like just straight corporate welfare handouts to big companies, there's rarely the benefits that come back. We've given the aerospace industry in Quebec has received oodles and oodles and oodles of money over the years, and they continue to lay off people. They continue to be less competitive, and we're in the end we end up propping up often bad businesses. I mean, how many governments have lost their shirt trying to prop up bad businesses? It's sad. And when people lose their jobs, it's never fun. But the decision to subsidize some of those jobs at $200,000-$300,000 a piece of taxpayer money doesn't make economic sense.
So yeah, okay. So I just want to crystallize, which I think you said on the multiplier effect question, which is these claims should be critically and skeptically analyzed. It's not implausible that there is a payoff to upfront investments, but that maybe people sitting in our chairs on the political side of it, maybe the finance minister, when the budget is tabled, will have an incentive to make the case for multipliers when they're not actually there. Is that
that's you've okay.
got
exactly what I said.
All right, and then the final question I want to get to ask you, and there's so many other things that I had in mind, but this is the way it's going to be with this podcast. I guess we're running through the topics and lots to cover. So, all right, social programs, social spending, supporting people during COVID-19 and afterwards. There is a political consensus, at least among mainstream parties represented in Parliament, that providing support to Canadians, new forms of financial support in the midst of this pandemic, was very important. There's also some discussion then about, does the experience of the pandemic illustrate broader gaps in our social safety net, or problems of inconsistency or incoherence in the way that that's structured? What is your take on the social supports that were put in place? Do you think there is a need for some kind of extension of that spending or structural change to our social safety net? And then I'm going to follow up with our MPs on this question of universal basic income. And that kind of fits into this discussion of what should social programs look like post COVID-19. So I don't know if CTF has an official position. If not, what your take is on this concept of a universal basic income.
Yeah. So just quickly, I mean, I think that we do have the EI program in place, and I think that the fact that government has pivoted back to using EI was the right decision. I mean, I think that it's hard to be extremely critical of the rapid way in which the government was trying to create support programs for people that were left without a job, forced out by the pandemic. But I think that there was a lot of gaps and holes that could have been closed a lot quicker, and we could have probably moved to EI much sooner than we did. I mean, EI is not perfect. And EI is certainly not a universal system. It certainly treats people differently across the country. You see someone who can qualify for EI in Atlantic Canada and stay on EI much quicker, and you see abuse of the program compared to someone in Alberta where we have different circumstances, and it's tougher to get on, and you don't get to stay on as long. And because of that, you have seen, it's created disincentives, and it's created perverse incentives in some industries where things are seen as EI jobs. You go in, you do them for a set number of weeks till you qualify, and then if you stay on in those jobs, you're seeing as being selfish and hoarding that job that someone else could be using to qualify for EI. Now that's a perverse program, but despite the fact that EI is maybe not ideal, it would have been probably sufficient with some tweaks under the current circumstances, and I'm happy to see the government's gone back to that. Now that said, we have the potential that there's still going to be perverse incentives, and we saw last summer when restaurants were opening back up, they couldn't get their staff back because it was beneficial for some of the staff to stay on CERB than to come back and take a job. And that's not just restaurants, but there was lots of industries where, and they were minimum wage paying jobs, of no question, that there was no incentive to come back because the government was paying the money. Now, would a universal basic income system do that? Well, I mean, in theory, a universal basic income system sounds great, but only in the sense that you would replace every other social program with one sort of universal system. The problem with the theory is that it would never happen in practice, that there are too many unique circumstances out there for people that I don't trust the politicians and the bureaucrats to not stick to the one program forever. Even if there was the initial year or two where there was only one program, we got rid of everything else. There's no CPP, there's no OAS, there's no EI, there's no welfare, there's nothing. There's one universal program. All the provinces agree. I would guess my guess would be within 6 months or maybe 2 years, there'd be other programs kicking in to catch gaps, because there will be gaps. There'll be people that have unique circumstances that programs have been created for that are not benefited by the Universal Basic Income Program. And we've seen other countries try it. Other countries have tried UBI and they've abandoned their programs. We've seen it tried. We saw it tried in Manitoba. The results out of Manitoba in the 70s are really inconclusive. The government found it was too expensive, so instead of canceling the program, they canceled the research on the program. So all the data is gone. The little bit of research that was done is being sort of back looked at in terms of social outcomes. In fact, we actually have with our last magazine, our cover story is all about UBI. Really good story there, digging into it. And I'm not convinced that it wouldn't be extremely expensive. Even some of the numbers that have been thrown out by the Parliamentary Budget Office just shows that it would be, I mean, it's like $500 billion a year. It'd be like twice the size of our federal budget. So no, I don't think it's realistic. And I don't think there's any sort of silver bullet or way to come up with a perfect program. But I know that the one that the one that is being sold as UBI as being a great solution is only a great solution in theory.
Yeah. Okay. So bottom line, Scott, modern monetary theory, funding a universal basic income. We have no taxes, and we get to spend all the money we want. That would be great. But you're saying that's not going to happen this side of heaven, and we need.
Well, hey, I hope it does. I would love to have zero tax rates.
You would love to be wrong. That's the
yeah.
Okay.
Everyone, Tesla in every house, in every household. Oh man.
Yeah. So in the second half, we're going to be hearing from my good friends Erin Weir and John MacKay, and I don't know if they'll make the case for that extreme utopia that I've laid out, but maybe when you hear the final version of the podcast, Scott, you'll be convinced, and you'll be convinced that it's possible. So great to have you. Taxpayer.ca is your website. .com. Taxpayer.com is your website.
Or .ca. You can go to either one. We own
either
both.
Either one who want to find out more information. Thanks for being with us, Scott. Stay tuned. We're going to now turn it over to our MP panel. So unfortunately, we had a little bit of a technical problem for part of the conversation that happened between Erin, John, and myself. So you're going to hear 10 minutes of our conversation. In the future, the part 2 will likely be a longer discussion. But hopefully this short 10-minute back and forth between Erin, John, and myself will whet your appetite for future debates and conversations. All right, resuming debate. Here we have my good friends, as I said, John MacKay, longtime Liberal MP, and Erin Weir, former NDP, Independent, and CCF Member of Parliament. It's great to have you guys on for some reaction to that conversation with Scott and discussion about the upcoming federal budget. I'll just open it up. I want to just ask the broad question that I posed to Scott of build back better versus get back to normal. As you think about what should be in this budget, should it be more of a resetting things, big changes, or should it be more of a how do we stop the madness and get our economy functioning the way it used to be?
Well, there is no normal anymore. What used to be normal is no longer normal. So there's going to be a new normal if you don't, if you want. So you and I and Erin are all doing our work much differently than we used to. And our demands on infrastructure are going to be far different than they used to be. I think one of the biggest spends by the government, if it has to be a spend, is just get the internet viable in far greater areas in Canada. I think that would be, if you will, number one, and then certainly in our neck of the woods, the issue of transit. I have constituents who are over the last number of years gone from a commute of 40 minutes to a commute of 70 minutes. that's not sustainable, and it's a colossal waste of time. So those are, if that's Build Back Better, I'm all in favor of it. If it's the new normal, I'm all in favor of it. But I don't think there's any such thing as the old normal.
John, are your constituents gonna stop commuting though, and work from home more permanently?
Well, it's actually an interesting question. I hope that the mayor doesn't raise that as we try to advocate for transit out in Scarborough. But there will be fewer people commuting, and therefore maybe the demand won't be there. I don't know. You've watched the real estate market, for instance. Everybody's fled the city, and in the last 12 months, now they are coming back, flocking back to the city, possibly in anticipation of the pandemic receding. I don't know. All I know is the transit in Scarborough sucks, and we certainly need to do something about it sooner rather than later.
Erin, Build Back Better or get back to normal?
Well, Build Back Better, of course, has become one of these slogans where it could mean a lot of different things. I mean, no one's going to argue for building back worse. I mean, I think we should always be working to build a better society. That's why I got involved in politics. I think that's why you guys did as well. So, of course, the budget really has to do both, to try to get back to some version of normal while at the same time continuing to try to build a better society. John mentioned a couple of initiatives that he thought would be really important to the region that he represents. I'll maybe just mention a couple of things that I championed as an independent.
You guys are probably part of the problem Scott's talking about, right? Like, how quickly do we get to, like, you know, we need funding for this in my local area, and there's 338 people with all kinds of great ideas. Sorry to go, but we want to hear those, Erin.
I'd say to Scott, cry me a river, buddy.
Yeah, right. Well, Garnet, they'd be applicable to your region and Scott's region too. So one is this whole notion of border adjustments to carbon pricing. I think if we're going to have a carbon tax on our own industry, it's important to apply it to the carbon content of imports from countries that don't price emissions. I was really glad to see that idea included in the 2020 fall economic statement, and I'm hoping it gets further developed in the upcoming budget. The second one that I was kind of proud to be the first MP to raise in Parliament was lifting the cap on the Fiscal Stabilization program, which basically is a program that provides support for provinces that suffer a really big drop in revenue in a particular year. This is a big issue for Saskatchewan and Alberta, which are very dependent on volatile commodity prices, but of course not eligible for equalization. So again, I was pleased to see that the fall 2020 economic statement did lift the cap on the Fiscal Stabilization program. It also promised further improvements, and I'm looking forward to seeing those in the budget. So I think those are two kind of programs that would make a really big difference for Saskatchewan and Alberta in particular, but makes sense for the country as a whole.
All right. Well, as folks will see, there's plenty of things on which we disagree, and I'd love to have you back, Erin. We can dig into the carbon pricing piece of it, but there are things we agree on as well. And my conservative colleague Tom Kamish from Calgary has a private members bill that would completely lift the cap on the Fiscal Stabilization program. The government has proposed an increase, but they have not eliminated the cap entirely, and we're proposing to eliminate that cap, and that's an important kind of national unity, fairness in the federation conversation that we can go into in great depth in the future. We got to wrap up in a moment, but 60 seconds each of you on universal basic income. You got NDP and Liberal conventions this week, this past weekend, and obviously UBI was discussed at both those conventions. Maybe this time Erin first and then John, and then we will stop after that. Universal basic income as a concept. Scott says it's not realistic. It's good in theory, but wouldn't work in practice. What do you think?
I'm supportive of it as a concept, but of course, as Scott mentioned, the devil is in the details in terms of how you set it up. Milton Friedman, and I suspect, Scott would support a very minimal universal basic income as an alternative to the rest of the welfare state. I think Social Democrats would tend to view a universal basic income as being in addition to other social programs, as a way of filling in some gaps between existing programs. And it is a big challenge to have something that is truly universal, that's at an adequate level of income, and that also provides incentives for people to go out there and earn other income without losing all of the benefit right away. So I think it's something that should be pursued, but there's a lot of really important trade-offs in designing that type of a program properly. So I'm really glad to see it being debated at conventions.
John.
Yeah, in that respect, I agree. It is an interesting idea, and possibly it's an idea that's come. I know there's members of my caucus think it's a terrific idea. Regrettably, no one's been able to generate the evidence, whether it's in Manitoba or whether it's Ontario. We just had one with the Wynne government, or internationally, that it's viable. I agree with Scott's observation that the 6 months after it's implemented and all of the other programs are eliminated, that there will be inevitably somebody saying, well, this gap is there or that gap is there. And then you'll have universal basic income plus, and that'll be universal basic income plus, and it won't end. So, and it just cost an enormous amount of money. And here we just finished a conversation of how we're going to pay for what we've already committed to. So I'm interested in the debate. I don't know where, I'm skeptical as to where it'll go.
All right. Well, lots to pick up on, lots to continue. We could talk for hours on end. I think it's great to see both of you. And thanks for coming on the first edition of this podcast. If folks liked what they hear, please leave a review somewhere on the internets. I don't know how that all works, but
say something nice about Garnet.
Leave a review, post on social media. Do what John did. Say something nice. He can do it. Even he's a Liberal. He said something nice about me. Not that hard.
I had to work at it, but yeah.
Okay. All right. We will have both of you back. I look forward to sharing more content. We're going to be doing this on a weekly basis, so look forward to sharing more content with all of you. Thanks, everyone. Have a great week.